So for the third reading this morning, I've chosen a passage from the book, Why, what your life is telling you about who you are and why you're here, because it will fit exactly into the exercise I'm going to propose at the end of the homily. When a young wild elephant, a keddah, is being trained, it is tied to an experienced working elephant, a kumi, for many weeks before it can be ridden by the trainer, the mahout. Imitation is both the highest form of flattery and an efficient way to learn a new skill. A not dissimilar system shows up in human development. Children learn by being yoked to a family and a culture, and by learning to imitate. They learn language and accent, but also values, prejudices, ideals, fears, hopes, confidence, despair. They will imitate dress code, walking style, and eating habits, and be cued into the use of alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and sexuality. They will organize their own lives around the powerful archetype of the hero, and seek inspiration from both public personalities and private relationships. A lot of money and media promotion will offer a slew of sports stars, actors and actresses, supermodels and musicians as subjects worthy of admiration and imitation. Occasionally, a Mother Teresa will achieve superstar status, and the results are both social and psychological. Research has shown that just watching a movie of Mother Teresa's work leads to an immediate strengthening of the viewer's immune system. But personal heroes can also come from one's own family or circle of acquaintances, and can exert quite an influence, whether it leads to joining a gang or joining the Peace Corps. Here are some of my heroes. A friend of mine was paralyzed as a young man in a diving accident, but went on to become a very accomplished attorney who has advocated nationally and internationally for the rights of the disabled. Christine Noble was rendered homeless as a child in Dublin, Ireland. She lived on the streets and was sexually assaulted more than once. Yet she went on, because of a vivid dream about a young Vietnamese girl calling out to her for help, to found several orphanages in Vietnam. Gandhi's expulsion from a first-class railway carriage in South Africa was the catalyst for a lifelong commitment to ahimsa, peaceful rebellion against injustice and oppression. Are these the kinds of heroes you might want to imitate? Perhaps there are different qualities that you want to develop. So think of people whom you hold as heroes and identify the qualities that appeal to you. It's a truism that your character can be inferred from the company you keep. Not just your social company, but also the intrapsychic company of your own thoughts. So whose images align with your core, rather than merely arousing a self-serving agenda? Whom do you admire? Whose lives display the values that matter most to you? And I'll pick up on that at the end of the homily with an exercise I'll propose. These are words inspired by God. Parables are a very pithy form of storytelling, and they contain a beautiful message very, very quickly. And for me, the greatest parable speaker of all time, maybe the greatest storyteller of all time, was Jesus. He was an extraordinary ability to encapsulate deep, deep mystical truths in very short little anecdotes. Another group who were excellent at storytelling, I believe, were the the Sufis, mystic Islam. They're a great trove of storytelling as well. And there's one story that comes to mind right now as I was thinking about this homily. And it's a story of a group of desert nomads who are living in a little oasis. They've been living there for many, many years. But now the oasis is kind of running down in resources. So they've called this place, they call it Old Town, because they've been living in it for many, many years. And now they reckon they need to strike out and find a new oasis. And there's talk about a place about 300 miles distance, which is called Newtown. And it's a new oasis. If they can find that, they can live there in comfort for many, many years. And they're told that if they travel through the desert due east for about 300 miles, they're going to come to this huge big signpost, and there are going to be 4 fingers on the signpost. One of them is pointing back to Old Town, from which they've come, and then one of the other fingers is going to point to Newtown, to the oasis that they want to access. And so they set out, and they're traveling for months and months and months, following due east, expecting to find this great big signpost. Now, at some stage, they're traveling, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're beginning to argue, and they're running really low on resources. And just then, when they're about to give up, one of them spots the signpost several miles ahead, and they're delighted. Oh, there it is. There's the signpost that will teach us how to get to Newtown. And they set off running. And then a huge big desert storm blows up, and they can't see anything for about half an hour. And when the storm is blown over, they see that the signpost has fallen down. And now they really give up. They think, that's it, we're lost. We'll never figure out how to get to Newtown. And then an old man in the group steps up and he says, stand the signpost back up again and put it where it originally was, in the hole. And now the pointer that says Old Town pointed back to where we've come from. And then we can see where the Newtown lies. So they stand it upright, they twist it around until the finger that says Old Town is pointing back from when they've come, and now they can see the other finger, one of the fingers pointing to Newtown, and they set off. And the moral of the story is, the best way to kind of prepare for the future is to understand the past, to understand where you've come from in your journey, as you continue in your journey toward enlightenment, to figure out where have you been, where are you now, and where have you come from. And that's what I'm trying to do this month in the homilies this month. My theme for the month was grounding your incarnational mission on Gaia, trying to figure out why you're here, why you've come, what your purpose is. And to understand that, you have to understand something about your past. And by your past, I don't mean just what happened in 2023. I mean what happened in your entire lifetime, this time round. And I mean what happened in previous incarnations, who you were, where you were, what you did. And so an understanding of where you've come from is vitally important in understanding what your mission is and where you want to be headed. And so as I continue today, I'm going to draw again from the themes that we outlined in a book that I co-wrote in 2013 with McKay and Ralph Metzner. Last Sunday we had a discussion about this. Michael has since checked it out, and it's available from Amazon again at the moment. It's available in audible format and also in Kindle format. And at the end of today's homily, I'll do what I did last Sunday. I'll propose another simple practical exercise to help you with your psychological and your spiritual development. So I'm going to deal with some other things that we covered in that book. And I want to differentiate between values and ideals. Now, very, very often, we use these words as if they were synonyms, that a value and an ideal are the same thing, but they're radically different. An ideal is how you'd like to behave. Values are how you're likely to behave. So there's a significant difference between ideals and values. Ideals are how you'd like to behave. Values are how you're likely to behave. And my favorite example of that is the Declaration of Independence in 1776, this extraordinary document, which for me is almost biblical in its wisdom. And according to that, we are told that this truth is self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now that's the ideal. The ideal is that all men are created equal. But back in 1776, the value was very different from the ideal. So all men are created equal, as long as they're not Native American, Indian, Indigenous people, or they're not African Americans, or they're not women, because these were not created equal according to the times. It took us 248 years in order to rectify those emissions. So the ideal was that all men are created equal. The value was, Native Americans, African Americans, and women, are not of the same value as men are. So it's very, very important then to realize what this distinction is. And the function of the prophets throughout history is to point out the discrepancies between the ideals we espouse and the values that we actually live by. And certainly a cursory perusal of Christian history or Islamic history, it shows you what the difference between the message that's been preached and what's actually being practiced. To use a totally different kind of a metaphor, it's like a car journey. If you're driving a car, it's what your hands do with the wheel that determine, where you're going to arrive. So the hands on the wheel are like your behavior and your thoughts and your words and your deeds, and they determine the route that the car is actually going to take. Now, the ideals are your stated destination, but your values are the intended destination. And very often the intended destination is done unconsciously. So the ideals are, you plug your ideals into the GPS and you say, here's where I want to go. But then you ignore the directions the GPS has given you and you go someplace else. You're being driven by some kind of an unconscious, value rather than the ideal itself. So the GPS, you plug it in, you say, here's where I want to go. Those are your ideals. And then you find that your hand on the wheel is taking you someplace else completely. So it's very important to wake up to that distinction in our individual lives, not just as at a national level or a global level, but at an individual level. What are the ideals I espouse, but what are the values that actually wind up driving my behavior? And how can I bridge the gap between the value I'm actually living by and the ideals that I espouse? So that's an important distinction as we think about where we've come from Old Town. The second thing I want to look at then, I want to look at the notion of the Akashic Records. And when I've thought about this over the years, it seems to me that I have to have a much deeper understanding of Gaia, of planet Earth itself. And my belief system is that Gaia has 7 different levels of the self, or 7 different kinds of bodies, just like the human body has 7 different levels according to Hindu teaching. And so the first level of Gaia is the physiosphere. It is the 3rd rock from the sun in this particular solar system. It's a rock. That's the first level of body. It's solid stuff. The second level is the atmosphere. The atmosphere for me is the womb of the planet. In order to give life, this rock had to develop a womb. And that womb is the atmosphere, sometimes called the hydrosphere. Then inside this womb of the atmosphere, the biosphere emerges. And the biosphere throws up all kinds of life, singular cellular creatures, multicellular organism, flora and fauna, and finally human beings. So that's the 3rd level that Gaia has, is the biosphere. The 4th level, Tyler DeShada called the noosphere, nous from mind, and it's a sheath of consciousness that surrounds the atmosphere and the physiosphere and the biosphere. Now, the noosphere is the stage that we're at, that we are experiencing right now, and it's a very dangerous trajectory. I've sometimes likened it to the kind of the asteroid belt. If you're trying to send a satellite from Earth, let's say to Mars or to Jupiter, you're going to have to pass through a very dangerous minefield of broken up rocks. Now, the noosphere is like that, accessing the noosphere is like that. So we're in a place now where we're attempting to create a sheath of consciousness around the planet. And this sheath of consciousness can take us into deeply spiritual arenas, or it can wind up just being kind of a transhumanist agenda where we're turned into homo artificialis, just cyborgs, which are hackable and programmable. And that's where we are in the trajectory right now. And it's a very important stage, but a very dangerous stage. If we manage to survive that, we reach the planet itself reaches what I call the anima sphere. The anima as the Latin word for a soul, that the planet has a soul self. And beyond that, I call it the pneuma sphere. Pneuma is the Greek word for a spirit. So there's the spirit sphere, and then ultimately there's the cosmosphere, or God sphere, if you want to call it that. So to understand the Akashic Records, we have to be able to kind of perambulate through those various levels and these understandings of what Gaia herself is, who our mother is. In order to understand what the records are, we have to understand who our mother is. So reality for me then is like an infinite series of organically evolving clustered, which are generated by the experiences of beings at every level of reality, both in time and out of time. So the record is about all these clusters of experiences which have been generated by everything, living thing in the cosmos itself. Now, there's a great phrase in the Jewish liturgy that says, in every generation, the children of Torah become its builders. So we're not just the inheritors of a tradition which is static, but we become its builders as well. And we pass on to the next generation our insights and our interpretations of what the scriptures are. So we're not just passive receivers of traditional teachings or traditional laws, but we are active and we are interactive in this game of God, this game called Gaia. We leave our imprint on it, and therefore we create further records for Akasha. So when you think then of the notion of the morphogenetic field, the morphogenetic field is a kind of a species-specific subset of the Akashic Records. It's what allows different forms to come into being on our planet. And so it's like a dance between light and logos. All matter is frozen light. And logos is the morphological agent. You know, we learn in the Christian scriptures, in the beginning was the Word. That's logos in Greek. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. All things were created through him, and without him was created nothing that was created. So logos is the morphological agent. It's like matter, light and logos are like the clay and the potter. So matter is the stuff, the frozen light out of which all form will emerge. But the potter is necessary in order to create the form. So there needs to be a morphological agent, some agent who's creating form and shape out of that. So then, you know, the potter is this information which is created and archived. Is we pick it up every time we reincarnate. We pick up at the causal body level all of the experiences of all of our previous incarnations. And when we die, at the end of any one incarnation, we archive in the astral body all of the experiences that we've generated in this incarnation just finished. And so then in that sense, the Akashic Records are the total archive of all creation since the Big Bang. Everything that has ever happened, any sentient being particularly who has generated experiences, all that are contained in the records. And we upload to it and we download from it. It's like if you went on a vacation and you took a whole bunch of photographs and then you put them up on your kind of a personal website and you give your friends kind of a password to get into it, they can download the photographs that you've uploaded, or they can upload photographs to you. And so in some senses, that's what the Akashic Records are like. You can upload to them and you can download from them. And it's interesting, the more people that access those records, the easier it becomes to access those records. So practice makes perfect in a sense. So there's a very interesting phenomenon that if you're interested, for instance, in doing crossword puzzles, and the morning paper arrives and you attempt to do the crossword puzzle. If you wait to attempt the crossword puzzle until the evening time when you come home from work, it'll actually be much easier to solve the crossword puzzle than if you tried it in the morning. Because in the meantime, tens of thousands of people have solved the crossword puzzle. And so there's a morphogenetic field has been created. There's an intelligence out there. And by plugging into that, it's actually much easier for you to finish the crossword puzzle in the evening. And this is well authenticated scientifically than if you attempted it in the morning. One of my favorite examples is Roger Bannister in 1954, a student in, it was either Oxford or Cambridge, who was attempting to run a sub 4-minute mile. And the consensus was at that stage that it was physiologically impossible for a human being to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. But in 1954, he did it. And within 3 or 4 months, 50 other runners had broken the 4-minute mile because the morphogenetic field had been set up. The habit had been created, you know, to use Rupert Sheldrake's phrase. And so the Akashic Records then, you know, become easier and easier to access as more and more of us spend time trying to understand the wisdom that's resident, you know, in our universe. The next notion I want to cover then is the whole notion of reincarnation. There is no possible way that a human being can grok the entirety of Earth life from playing one role once. By being born this time as an Irishman, you know, from in Cork City in Ireland, there is no way as an Irishman I can grok the entire gestalt of what it means to be a human being. And that is why reincarnation is so important. If you want to have an experience of being human, then you have to be born again and again and again in order to experience different cultures, being born in a male body or a female body, in a different religion, with a different IQ, with a different language and a different culture. Until you've kind of experienced all of them, you haven't understood what it means to be a human being. You can't grok Shakespeare by reading just one of his sonnets or taking or acting in one of his plays. Yeah, you have to kind of expose yourself to the collected works of Shakespeare. So in that sense, then, reincarnation is so important in order for human beings to be able to grok this 3D dense reality. And the great upside of reincarnation for me is that reincarnation ends all kinds of prejudice, sociological, theological, and psychological. Because if you've been born in all the other positions, it is impossible when you understand who you are. It's impossible to be prejudiced about the kind of the configuration in which you presently find yourself. So reincarnation then becomes, thinking about reincarnation and studying reincarnation for me becomes a very important way of dealing with prejudices in our world and in our times. I want to look then at the notion of free will and temptation. So as we evolve, as individual human beings, and as you go up the scale of more and more advanced life forms like angelic beings or whatever, the more advanced we become, the greater our abilities and the greater the temptations. And so advancing in spirituality is not a guarantee of actually being a better person, because you're going to be faced with more and more temptations to exercise power, to control others. So all temptation is ultimately an effort at power or control of resources and people and institutions. And we find this in politics, we find it in religion, we find it in the news media, we find it in finance, we find it in education, we find it in the military. There's this attempt to grab control of the resources of the people and the institutions. That's part of the temptation of some kind of advance. And so power corrupts. There was a famous, Lord Acton, a very famous Catholic in England in the time of papal infallibility, who came out against papal infallibility. So we're talking about 1870 and the First Vatican Council. And although he was a very dedicated Catholic himself, he was totally against the idea of papal infallibility. And he came up with the phrase, power corrupts, and great power corrupts greatly. And certainly we've seen that in all of our institutions, religious and political and economic. Power definitely corrupts people. So the problem is that narcissistic megalomaniacs tend to rise and to self-promote to leadership positions. And we see this in all kinds of governing bodies and in all kinds of hierarchical systems, that very, very often the people who are promoted to the top or who self-promote to the top are absolutely narcissistic megalomaniacs who use their power to control and to dominate others. Now, there's a light side to this as well, a bright side to it, which is very important. So Rumi, the very famous Islamic mystic, said at one stage, he said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. And Shakespeare would say famously, there is nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So in some senses, it's our models and our kind of reactions to systems that create these artificial divides between light and dark. Because whoever Satan is, we are meant to work with that reality in order to grow spiritually. So temptation is not an invitation to evil, but it's an invitation to hone the faculty of discernment. What kinds of thinking, what kinds of speaking, what kinds of acting create peace in our times and in our world? So the entire object of temptation actually is not an invitation to be bad people, but an invitation to hone the faculty of discernment. The Jesuits had a famous phrase, they called it de discretione spirituum, discretion among spirits, that the function of a spiritual director was to be able to discern the influences that are coming to bear on our decision-making processes. All of the great avatars were tempted before they began their public ministries. You look at the story of the Buddha, or you look at the story of Jesus Christ. So all the great avatars have to go through the fire of temptation in order to hone the faculties of discernment. You can't hit the bullseye unless you get the feedback from the previous arrows and adjust your aim. So sin is not a negative thing in the sense that it's bad. Sin is a feedback mechanism which allows me to readjust my aim so I can hit the bullseye. So it's a very important part of the learning process. In fact, without temptation, we would simply be robots programmed to be good. They're only good in the unconscious sense that we have no choice in the matter. So it becomes really important then that we face the temptations of our lives, whether it's at an individual level or a societal level or a global level, in order to discern what courses of actions and what kinds of decisions actually empower everybody to reach for their spiritual inner core. I'm going to look then at the notion of memes and genes. A meme is to a culture as a gene is to an organism. So an organism is a particular combination and permutation of genes. So the permutation that creates a bunny rabbit is different from the permutation that creates a human being or an oak tree. And it's interesting, you know, we share 60% of our genes with bananas. We share 98% of our genes with chimpanzees. And so it's the combination of the genes that create the organism. And so genes kind of create the morphology of a particular form of an organism. Now, memes do that for the culture. So a meme is to the culture what a gene is to an organism. And just as an organism is built from a particular combination of genes, so a culture is built of a particular combination of memes. So memes are kind of the underlying belief systems or the underlying cosmology that creates the culture. And in that system, archetypes are the ideal form and complexes are the imperfect physical form. And the example I use to illustrate this is there's a huge difference between the mother archetype and the mother complex. So we think that a complex is a hang-up. It's not. That is not what it means. So the mother archetype is the fact that every little infant is born into the world and imprinted on its soul is the expectation of meeting a mother figure who will love it and protect it and feed it. That's the mother archetype. And every one of us is imprinted with that. Every living being is imprinted with that. Particularly in the mammalian world, every being is imprinted with that mother archetype. However, the mother complex is the result of the actual experiences I'm having with the physical woman who carried me and birthed me and is now calling herself my mother. That's the mother complex. You know, and the mother complex is fairly different from the mother archetype. No person is perfect. So the mother that I'll actually encounter will be less than perfect. And so the mother complex means the constellation of emotionally associated experiences I have around the physical woman that I call mother. So we have an archetype and we got a complex. Now, meaning then comes when we have this aha experience, because we've harvested our experiences for how well or how badly we're aligned with our own archetypes, with the archetype of soul within the self. So meaning then is when we have this kind of aha, I'm kind of aligned with the purpose for which I'm come. And of course, there are true meanings and there are false meanings, because meaning is in the mind of the seeker, because we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So it becomes really important then to look back at the old town in order to figure out where the new town lies. Where have I come from? You know, what mistakes have I made? What great things have I done that will help me to kind of set my compass for the future? So true meaning then, in true meaning, the complex matches the archetype. The perfect mother is the mother who corresponds completely with the archetype of mother. Now, it's very difficult to achieve that, but some mothers manage to do it better than other mothers. Each one of us has the archetype of the divine. And now we've got the divine complex, and the divine complex very often is religion, which is telling us that God is a distant, demanding deity and that Jesus is the judge. So there's a huge discrepancy between the God complex and the God archetype. And true meaning consists in matching the complex to the archetype, of understanding who God really is in herself, and then creating systems and worship and communities which are in alignment with that understanding, not with some kind of fundamentalist fear-based dogma. I want to speak then about the notion of a preconception contract. When I say a preconception contract, I mean that before we incarnate for any one lifetime, we have to decide when to incarnate, where to incarnate, among whom to incarnate, and what purpose or mission I have for the incarnation. And then it's improv theater. Once we arrive, it's improv theater. There's no script and there's no plot. It's just we find ourselves in the midst of an ongoing drama that people have been playing for thousands and thousands of years, and we're situated now in a particular family, in a particular culture, at a particular period of human history, and we're now going to respond to the cues around us. So it's improv theater. Before we came, we only knew the following kinds of things. We knew the history of all the others with whom we were going to share the planet. So as I parachute into incarnation on October the 8th, 1946, I knew the history of all of the 6.4 billion people with whom I was going to share the planet. I knew my own personal history from previous incarnations, how well or how badly I did, what my strengths were and what my failings were. And I know the mission I'm being sent to do, the mission I volunteered for. And for every single one of us, there's a commonality to that. It is firstly to wake myself up to my inner divinity. It is secondly to wake others up to their inner divinity. And then thirdly, to wake the planet up to its Christ consciousness. So that's the kind of mission, the kind of generalized mission for every one of us. So we know the history before we come in. We also know our secret, sacred name. Logos as sound and vibration. And this is what morphs the soul into mission. It is the secret, sacred name that kind of becomes the morphological agent that kind of creates your soul to come into contact with and alignment with the mission you're here. So I speak constantly about what I call the 5 L's: love, light, logos, life, and laughter. That love is the ultimate reality. But love bears 2 children, twins, light and logos. And then light, as I say, is the essence of all matter. All matter is frozen light. And logos is the morphological agent. Logos is the potter that makes, forms out of the clay, which is light. And then what happens is when light and logos dance together, they create all these different life forms. And the final L is laughter. And laughter, the whole point of incarnation, is to learn how to laugh. To laugh at the illusion that I am my physical body, or I am my emotions, or I am my profession, or I am my relationships. The realization that I am a bite-sized piece of God who volunteered for incarnation, and so is everybody around me. And then I laugh, not derisively, but laugh at how could I have fallen from this? I've been here hundreds and hundreds of times. And each time I come, I fall for it. And it takes me time to remember who I really, really am. And so the laughter, firstly, is a kind of my own stupidity. Here I am, volunteering again and forgetting again. And before I came, I said, I'm not going to forget this time. I've forgotten every other time. I'm going to come down, and from the time I hit the ground, I'm going to hit the ground running. I'll hit the ground remembering that I'm a bite-sized piece of God. And of course, I forget. And so the laughter is, at some stage when I wake up to that realization, I laugh, at my own stupidity. And then I laugh, realizing that the rest of us are stuck in it as well. But it is not a derisive laughter. It's the laughter of waking up to the reality so that I can be part of the group that's helping to wake the planet up itself. So on the basis of that then, and on the basis of the first reading that I did, I'm going to conclude the homily by offering the following exercise. I call it the hero's journey. So I invite you at some stage during this week to make a list. Let's just say 5 of your heroes or your heroines. Name 5 people. And they can be historical characters, they can be biblical characters, they can be family members, they can be current people who are currently alive. Just make a list of 5 heroes or heroines of yours. And then for each of these individuals, highlight the particular trait that you most admire in each person. And it can be different. For instance, if you chose a Mother Teresa, it could be her compassion. If you chose Mahatma Gandhi, it could be his ahimsa, kind of dedication to non-violence. If it was Nelson Mandela, it could be to kind of standing against apartheid. And so highlight the individual trait you would most admire in each of these persons. Then rate that trait. On a score of 1 to 10, how would you rate them? On compassion, where would you rate Mother Teresa? Was it an 8 or a 9, whatever? If you look at, for instance, Martin Luther King Jr., and you look at his commitment to equality, how would you rate that in Martin Luther King Jr.? Would it be a 6, a 7, an 8, or a 9? So rate the trait. Then fourthly, rate yourself on that same scale for that attribute. So on the scale of 1 to 10, where do you lie as far as compassion is concerned? on the scale of 1 to 10, where do you lie as far as kind of peacefulness is concerned? And so rate yourself on each of these scales. And then the final thing is create an action plan to bridge the gap between your hero score and your own score. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.